Hi, my name is Phil Anderson, and I'm running for United States Senate to represent Wisconsin. Yes, yet again tonight, you get a different angle of my basement behind me. But that's because I just spent a few hours at church. As many of you know, I am an Orthodox Christian, and it's Holy Week for us, so tonight we commemorated the betrayal of Judas, Judas betraying Jesus to the authorities on the day before he was crucified. I'm not here to talk about religion, though. Most of you or many of you may not be religious. It doesn't really matter. The point is, it brings up to me the whole idea of betrayal. Betrayal is a terrible thing, obviously. You know, it's one thing when you commit a crime against somebody else, or do something mean or wrong, or infringe on their rights or whatever. But it's another thing completely different if you've made a commitment to them, if you've come to an agreement or had a meeting of the minds, and then you go back and change it up on them, betray them. In Judas's case, it was for money, but people do all kinds of terrible things in society for love, lust, greed, power, whatever. And that brings me to the real topic tonight. There's been a ton of betrayal by the government and the two big political parties in the United States, and basically through the entire history of our country. Some highlights, the Civil War, for example, although it was waged for some very good reasons, was basically waged by Lincoln to, by force, deprive the states of their sovereign decision to secede from the Union. That was his main goal. Slavery was a byproduct of that. Getting rid of slavery, of course, is a wonderful thing. That was an abomination and an infringement on human rights of a bunch of different people, obviously, but the main reason he fought it was to infringe on the rights of those sovereign states, to secede, to preserve the Union, to maintain northern power. Also, in 1913, it was a betrayal for our government to hand over control of our money supply to the newly created Federal Reserve, a non-accountable organization made up of bankers and shadowy powers who have basically been stealing from us ever since. It was a betrayal to lie to us about the reasons that we entered different wars. The Vietnam War, where we demonized and over-exaggerated what was going on in Vietnam and the aggression of the Chinese, etc., where we were enticed by our government to be happy about sending people over there. Of course, that backfired. There was a lot of resistance to that. But even then, we didn't learn our lesson, because we were then betrayed again by our government in the way they dealt arms for hostages with people that they shouldn't have been dealing with in the 80s, and then basically demonized their former ally, Saddam Hussein, in 1991, and we got sent to war over there. And then the second Iraq War, where we were lied to about the existence of weapons of mass destruction. And it's basically been, those are just a few highlights, maybe not, certainly not all of them, of all the different ways that our government, and being controlled by the two basically large, unaccountable political parties, has betrayed us over the years. Lately, it's been even more apparent, I think, to members of both Republicans and Democrat parties. As a matter of fact, people who are followers of Bernie Sanders feel betrayed by the process that their candidate has been through and has been basically betrayed by. People thought in the Democrat Party that when they voted in state primaries and when they followed certain candidates, that would prevail, but that's not the case. The same with the Republicans. In a certain sense, there's been a huge difference of direction between the party establishment, and the people's choice, at least so far, has been Donald Trump, and that's caused a lot of trouble too. A lot of betrayal, a lot of dirty tricks. And it's come to light finally that this process was never really intended to express the will of the people, but mainly just to keep the powers that are currently in authority over us through our government to remain in authority. Much like the Pharisees would never have wanted to give over control or authority over the Jewish people to a Messiah. They wanted to just keep their own authority. So they treated Jesus accordingly. And it even comes down to the behavior, the political behavior of the two candidates that I'm running against. Russ Feingold, for example, originally was a guy, at least a guy that we thought was a man of the people, a man who stood for Wisconsin values, whatever those might be, who was against the powers in Washington who really represented us. And after he got beat in 2010 by Ron Johnson, when he had an opportunity to run against Scott Walker in 2012, declined, and instead went to work to re-elect Barack Obama, who at the time was drone striking and bombing countries and doing all kinds of nefarious things, which the person that we thought Russ Feingold was would never have tolerated. And then the other opponent, Ron Johnson, elected in 2010 as a Tea Party candidate, as a constitutionalist, goes to Washington and, of course, gets sucked into the power situation there, and sits on a couple of committees, but in the end just votes along with the Republican establishment anyway, and does things that his supporters would never have thought he would do. Things like voting for increases in the federal budget, for more debt, for continued funding of Planned Parenthood, for reinstatement of NSA spying. So basically, the story of America, and I think this was actually foreseen by the fathers of our country, of our forefathers when they wrote the Constitution, is a history of a government against its people. That's why the Constitution was so important. It was originally set up to be, this is what the rights that citizens have inherent in human beings. These are the authority that the federal government has, and according to the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights, that the rest of it should be reserved to the states. Of course, that has not happened over the course of our 200 plus years of existence. It's been a constant struggle between those who would control the wealth and power and authority of the people from Washington, from state capitals to a certain extent as well, but from Washington. And it's ever increased over the years as we've continued to express faith in those whom we elect and continue to be betrayed over and over and over again. That is one of the main reasons I'm running for United States Senate, especially as a libertarian, because we have a commitment, a philosophical, political commitment to not be that way. We don't get too many campaign donations because we're not a good investment. We're not the kind of people who are going to go to Washington, be sucked into some influence peddling scheme, and then turn around and inflict government power and suck taxes out of the economy and things like that. We just don't do that. That's not who we are. We are diametrically opposed to that. And that's why you see my opponents raising a ton of money, and I don't, because I'm not a good investment, nor are the other Libertarian Party candidates. We are diametrically opposed to government running roughshod over the rights and authority of people, and that's why we have such a difficult struggle. We have wonderful candidates, an excellent party structure, people with sound ideas who can articulate them, but we're going to have a difficult time being elected, mentioned in polls, be in debates, those sorts of things, because we stand opposed to everything that Washington is now, and that is this greedy, warmongering, fear-mongering, identity politics playing structure that only serves to continue its own power. It is not interested in people's rights or states' rights, except insofar as they can exploit it to further maintain their own power by pandering to us, which they do every single day. So that's what I stand for as a libertarian. That, I believe, is the betrayal that's happened between those who would govern us and those of us who are governed. And I think the only answer is to have as little government as possible, only barely what is needed. And in that way, we don't give them the power to exploit us. We take care of ourselves. Thanks. I'll talk to you tomorrow.